Follow me! We shall crush them beneath us!
I'd like to ask you guys one question. When's the last time you trust a journalist? Or a video game journalist, whatever it is? Because for journalists, I don't know when, but I know video game journalists the last time, which was 2014. And since 2014, aka Gamergate 1, many gamers distrust journalists anymore. Another question is that how come many journalists refuse to take coverage or even review, let's say coverage of Eastern video games? Why I say this? Because, yeah, there are some will take the cover. Marvel Rivals, according to Dr. Disaster, when it first launches, no journalist was covering it. Yes, YouTuber is covering it, but how come the journalists aren't? Here, we'll react to Dr. Disaster's video. I'm gonna show you this. Oh, by the way, I had to do this a second take because my OBS jammed for some unknown reason. Here, let me show you this.
Alright, me hearties, make sure that you hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also, don't forget to support the channel by becoming a member. There are multiple exclusive projects you won't want to miss out on that will be available to members only, including audiobook of dark fantasy novels that I've written and a space pirate cartoon. There will be more information soon, but it occurs to me that we can't just point out the things we don't like in our culture, we have to push the things we do like. So, if you're interested in supporting that sort of thing, consider becoming a member of the channel. In any event though, let's see what's going on with this game, The First Berserker Kazan, which wasn't very high on my radar until recently, but now I'm thinking I might have to pick it up, especially if the game journalists are ignoring it like this.
Okay, before we let Dr. Disaster continue, this is similar with Marvel Rival. They're not even trying to review this. Now, I would pick it up, but I already reserved my other things, like, say, AI limit. I believe I already reserved it. So, and that game is coming on the same day. So that's a lot. And that's another thing you should know is that The First Berserker Kazan has de nouveau. So I'm hesitant. And I'm probably going to pick up the PS5 version if there is. I had to recheck that. If there is, I'll pick it up for the PS5 version because I think, let's just say, if they still have de nouveau, it's probably difficult for me to play it on my PC. This is why, when it comes to this, I know I'm giving tips, but if there is de nouveau, just buy the physical version. Play the physical version first, and then play the PC version. Buy both, if necessary.
I'll throw this out there, I'm not the biggest fan of Souls-like titles. It's a genre that I can play, but I don't typically enjoy it as much as others, and I've definitely gone on record in the recent past saying that I feel the genre is a bit oversaturated in the market, it's a bit overdone. However, when a game looks as phenomenal as this one does, there really is no ignoring it. And what makes this all the more impressive is that this is from a division of Nexon, a studio that works under the Nexon umbrella, and they've never really done a game like this before at Nexon. But this is just another example of a South Korean studio swooping in and doing what the Western studios refuse to do. They've made a game featuring a buff, masculine character who doesn't apologize for his masculinity, and he just goes around kicking ass. And as a result, the game is selling. Now, I can already hear all the Ubisoft ass-kissers out there complaining and saying, wait a minute, how can you say that this game is selling and that Assassin's Creed Shadows isn't?
Before we let him continue, just so you know, the first thing we know is that the one thing that really helped South Korean to enter the AAA games, whether it's Zombie Survivors or Zombie Apocalypse or even Souls-like hack and slash, the one thing that did open the door is Stellar Blade and Black Myth Wukong. For Souls-like, Black Myth Wukong was the one that opens the door. And I think whoever made, or perhaps whoever developed, the first Berserker here is probably seeing Black Myth Wukong's success. They want to emulate it. And not only that, Phantom Blade Zero is aimed to be higher or perhaps to beat Black Myth Wukong's number. How does that work? I don't know for sure. We'll have to wait and see.
And in response to that, let me just let you in on a little secret. Context is everything, muchachos. Ubisoft's budget for Assassin's Creed Shadows is known to be multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, and their marketing campaign is massive as well. Not to mention the fact that Shadows has the advantage of being a part of one of the biggest franchises in video game history. Assassin's Creed is iconic. And to top it off, all the game journalists are out there shilling for this Assassin's Creed Shadows game in a big way. They have written tons of articles trying to talk people into playing this game. Hell, a bunch of these guys are intentionally conflating the number of players statistic that Ubisoft is touting with number of copies sold. Meanwhile, the first Berserker Kazan's budget is unknown, but since it isn't a Ubisoft or EA game, chances are it is much more reasonable. It's likely comparable to something like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which had a budget of around $50 million. The marketing campaign for the first Berserker is virtually non-existent. I've yet to see a single commercial in any of the articles that I've read or videos I've watched. Apparently, this game is based off the world of Dungeon Fighter Online, which is admittedly a known IP, though nowhere near the same brand recognition as Assassin's Creed. And as for whether or not journalists are going to shill for this game, let me direct you to what we are seeing on Metacritic.
Before we let Dr. Zez continue, you see this? This is the reason why, when it comes to Metacritics, even though nobody trusts them, what you need to see is here, right here, what I'm showing you right here. It's called user scores. And same goes for Rotten Tomatoes. Although Rotten Tomatoes, they will not release their user scores at least until days later after the release. We all know how that works.
Is the Metacritic page for Assassin's Creed Shadows. As you can see, the number of critic reviews for this game is 78. All of the major outlets naturally reviewed this game, and those reviews were available basically the instant that the review embargo lifted. There were a few stragglers, but they were all quick to review Shadows. And for reference, here's the Metacritic for Monster Hunter Wilds. That one has 97 reviews. Or check out the Metacritic for Kingdom Come 2. They got 68 reviews. Most game releases get somewhere in that ballpark. Now, if we're talking about an independent AA kind of release, that would be one thing. I could see why these game journos wouldn't review something like that. But the first Berserker is a AAA title, and this is the Metacritic page for this game. As you can see here, at the time of this recording, it has only 20 reviews. This is what game journalists do when they encounter games that don't fit their narrative. They ignore them.
Okay, before we get that, these journalists ignored them. Well, except for that Park Priest. I don't know if Park Priest or Fandom Pulse want to cover this. Remains to be seen. Look, folks, this is the reason why nobody trusts game journalists anymore. And again, for the first Berserker, I'm probably going to have to pick up the PS5 version because that game has de novo, and my performance on my laptop is probably going to be kaput. It's probably going to crash because this thing I know I can get if I put it on lowest, maybe 30 or 40. It depends on that place. So I'm gonna have to pick up the PS5 version soon. Another thing, I have AI limit reserve, so it might take a while for me to make a gaming let's play on this, but we'll see what happens next on my third channel. Always remember, check the user scores. If the user score is high but the Metacritic is low, that means that game is a good game. That's how you know.
They ignore them. They did it last fall to Lollipop Chainsaw Repop. That game still only has 8 reviews. The journalists really didn't want to talk about that game because it features an attractive female character, and we can't have that. The media did the same thing a few months back with Marvel Rivals. Very few reviewers touched that game for 2 reasons as far as I can tell. First of all, just like Lollipop Chainsaw, that game features attractive female characters. And second of all, Rivals comes from a Chinese studio, and game journalists aren't in the bag for these unconventional Eastern studios that are taking over the gaming industry.
If the Western AAA games, not all of them, continues to cater to the mythical modern audience, then they are letting the East taking over the gaming industry. They're not stopping. The East is still blitzkrieging their way to the top.
Thing is, these Western game journalists just don't have the same access to most of these Eastern studios that they enjoy in the West, and without that relationship, these journalists are much icier. So, with all that in mind, the first Berserker is from Nexon, a South Korean studio that put out The First Descendant, a game that the game journalists absolutely despise for showing too much skin. They don't care for Nexon. And also, the main character is a brutish, Conan-looking dude who kicks ass and takes names. In other words, he's the opposite of the characters that most game studios are pumping out nowadays, and these game journalists would rather pretend that this game doesn't exist. This is why it is so extraordinary that the game is doing so well on Steam. I mean, this isn't another First Descendant situation. For as much as people celebrated that game doing well, rubbing it in the face of the woke progressives who can't stand attractive female characters, that game was free. So the player count on Steam was definitely less impressive than it could have been. The first Berserker cost $60 though, so this game's meteoric rise to near the top of the Steam charts is legit. They currently have over 40,000 followers, which I'd like to point out is actually more than the number that we saw from Assassin's Creed Shadows when it was a few days away from its release. Basically, it's looking like the first Berserker, at least on Steam, is gonna have a similar release to Shadows, which is very good for a studio like Nexon. As I've said many times before, the Eastern studios are filling in the gaps that Western studios refuse to fill, and as a result, they are taking over the industry.
That is true. They are taking over. Congratulations to all the Eastern companies and Eastern games. Congratulations. And the Western market is up for the taking. Sometimes if you, another thing, like he says, always look at how many critic reviews. If the critic review is also low, let's say about 5-10 people compared to previous one, that means this game will succeed. And like I said, you have to see the user scores. The user scores that are always important to know whether or not the game will succeed. If the user scores is low than the critic score, that means that game is failed. But if the user score is high, but the critic score is low, the game will sell well. I think it's gonna take one successful video game to force every media outlet to cover these Eastern video games. Whether they like it or not, gonna have to cover it. Because it's either they cover it or lose their job. You know what? Let me rephrase this. Either they cover it without putting any politics or lose their job. One of the two.
You were most impressive. Surely your military skills will help guide us on the path to victory. I look forward to your continued efforts.
Leave a like and subscribe if you want gaming news, theories, comparison, or you just want to see me play games, or perhaps you are interested in trending topics. Visit my first, third, and channel up here, or link in the description.